Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. Have you ever wondered what neuro-linguistic programming is, and if and how applying the learning can be beneficial to you and your business? Today, I have the great pleasure to introduce Brigitta Hoeferle, CEO of the Centre of NLP in Atlanta, an NLP Master practitioner and host of the Success Patterns Show podcast. Brigitta describes herself as disruptive and positive by design, tenacious and strategic by default, thought-provoking and fun by nature. Today, Brigitta and I will chat about NLP and how it may be used as a tool to achieve success in business with particular alignment to purchasing, procurement and supply chain. So without further ado, I welcome Brigitta onto the podcast. Hi, Brigitta.
Hey, Dave. Thank you for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
Excellent. I've been looking forward to this. And as I mentioned before we started recording, I have been listening to your show, and I'd recommend everybody to dip their toe, so to speak, and I'm sure they'll enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have no doubt the audience are super quizzical about you, and particularly your personality. So please paint a picture of the person behind the name, the style, and the credentials, and how and why you became an NLP Master practitioner.
Yeah. Oh, boy. So this is only podcast. So I would assume this is only audio, not video. So let me draw, like Dave said, a picture. Imagine a little blonde girl in Germany growing up and questioning the status quo, not just once, and driving her parents up the wall with her energy and her curiosity. And at age 17, asking her parents, when I choose to go to university, is that something that I have to do my entire life? And her mother then said, honey, no, you're not going to be the same your entire life. That's just not who you are. This little girl grew up to be a master communicator at an early age. And that is Brigitta Hoeferle growing up in Germany. And then eventually going to school in the United States to then move back to Germany, have an executive position in corporate Germany. And that's where I met my husband when we lived in Munich. And that's where our first daughter was born. I just had a TED Talk, and I talk in my TED Talk about listening. And I have 2 degrees, and one is in communication. And at the beginning, when I studied communication, I really sucked at it. And although I studied it, I didn't fully understand how human behavior plays into our communication. And that's how I got really interested in psychology, more human behavior, and specifically neuro-linguistic programming. And I then decided to learn more about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, when my business started falling, or it didn't even start falling apart. It didn't even hit the ground running the way that I anticipated it when we started building a Montessori school. And I thought, first I was pointing fingers at everyone else. And I said, you're a dummy and you don't know what you're doing. And you, until I finally, after so many missed opportunities and challenges, I looked in the mirror and I said, there's one common denominator here. That's interesting. That's me. So what am I missing? What am I not doing? And that's where I dug then deeper. I remembered NLP. That's where I then dug deeper into NLP and became a master, and then a grandmaster, and was mentoring with the mentor here in Atlanta for years, decades. That's the whole journey. That's me in a nutshell.
Cool. So just put some context around the time it took when you started with NLP through to when you become a grandmaster practitioner. Is that 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? How does that stack up?
Yeah, it's more like 10, 12 years. I mean, think of think of martial arts. You don't become a grandmaster, or think of chess. You don't master something on that deep level overnight. Just like you don't become a success overnight. That's just ridiculous. No one does that. And failure plays into that. I like to say it's not failure, it's feedback. When it's failure, we don't learn from it. When we see it as feedback, we can learn from it and grow from it.
Interest in your connection, shall we say, with martial arts? Is it simply a way of keep adding your stripes, so to speak, the experiences, and you build up a series of points, or is there exams you have to take? How does actually transition and be recognized at different levels?
So you are recognized by taking different courses, right? But then at the grandmaster level, and different courses take different exams, but the biggest exam is how are you implementing it and what are the results that you're getting? That is the biggest exam of them all. Because I know a lot of people that have studied communication, that have studied human behavior, that have studied NLP, and then they don't do anything with it. They don't use it. They just study it. It's like me going to university and studying Spanish, but then I never go to a Spanish-speaking country and I never use Spanish. Well, guess what? I'm going to lose it before I even know it. I maybe intellectually understood the grammar of the language, but I am not using it, and therefore it will not be beneficial to me. I'm not going to get anything out of the time and money that I invested, and I will never be fluent in it. NLP is the meta program of our language. And if we just, I have people, Dave, that come to me and say, oh, I've read all of these NLP books. And I'm like, that's fascinating. So how fluent are you? And they're like, well, it's really dense. It's hard to understand. And then that's where I say NLP is taught by a living teacher with hands-on application. Books are great, but you cannot read a book and learn Spanish by reading a book. You got to practice it. You got to converse with someone.
Yeah. I use the analogy that you can use what we call Haynes manual in the UK to kind of know how to fix a car or a motorbike. But until you've actually got the spanners in your hand, then suddenly things change.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not quite so simple.
It is that hands-on approach. And, I really appreciate this hands-on approach because that's how humans learn. And, when we first moved to the United States with two small children, and I would speak German with them in public, and people would ask me, how did you teach your child to speak German? And I'm like, it's their mother tongue. I didn't teach them. They are learning by me modeling and speaking to them. That to them, that was such a foreign concept. And I'm like, oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's important for the audience to understand that it's not something you can just learn within a few years, get a degree or pass an exam, and suddenly you have this status. And so, as you said, it's lots of practicing, learning, doing, and achieving. So I think that's important just for people to get that in their head.
Yeah.
So let's see how you've applied some of this information then, this skill. Interesting you perhaps looking back now on some of the experience you've had. I wonder if you could describe a time when you have used NLP to improve the performance of a team. And in respect here, I'm thinking of a team, obviously of purchasing type people. I don't know if you've got some direct experience of that. So what techniques can you apply to a team that is working, let's say, for myself, and you really want them to excel in their field?
Yeah, I have a few examples, a few stories. I'll start with this one. I was invited to train a sales team, a collections team, and a customer care team in a large fintech company headquartered here in Atlanta. And when I came in, they used Salesforce. But when each of these teams, customer care, sales, or specifically the collections team, picks up the phone, they have nanoseconds to build rapport with the people that are on the phone. And when someone calls in customer care, or when someone gets a phone call from collections, it probably is not the most joyful conversation to have, right? So how the NLP comes in strategies. There are many NLP strategies. One of the first strategies that we teach is well-formed outcome and rapport building. So well-formed outcome is in any conversation, and now I'm making this much broader than the story, but what is the outcome that you want at the end of the conversation? What's at the end of the tunnel? And if that's not something that is doable, what would be a good compromise? So that's one. And then the second one is, how do you build rapport quickly? And that we've used some NLP cards that I have developed with a collection team and with the sales team and the customer care team that they can listen for. And that's the first and foremost part, that they can listen for. Where does that person come from? Not just in their words, the words that they're saying, but that's helpful, write down, oh, that person is using this phrase or these words frequently. Let me write these down, beware of them so I can repeat them back. So the listening for the words, the listening for which mindset are they in? They're frustrated. Okay, what are they frustrated most about? Giving them an opportunity, the other person on the line, to talk about what they're frustrated about. Again, listening on the tonality. Which tonality? Are they very monotone, or do they have, high pitch, low pitch, cadence, all of that? And then meet that tonality. Because if I'm talking to someone on the phone that is just very soft spoken and just very monotone, and then I come in my, energetic kind of woohoo energy, we will never build rapport, right? So it's the words, the tonality, the mindset, the purpose. For what purpose? That's where the well-formed outcome comes in. And then if you can have a call where you see them, pay attention to the body language. We live in a time now where we do a lot on meetings or Zoom or other platforms. The body language gives a lot of great information, not for us to mind read, but for us to ask more quality questions. And in procurement, in dealing with teams, in supply chain, in anywhere in any business environment, if you're able to listen on these 5 levels, it's going to make you a better leader, and B, it's going to get you to the results that you truly desire quicker.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Now, obviously, we've touched on a few things, and I want to go a little bit deeper in some areas. Obviously, from a procurement point of view, communicating with a supplier is important. You've got to build, obviously, relationships over a period of time, some of which are obviously on, unfortunately, email, which is not the best of things to do. You've touched on Zoom or Teams, the video type of communication. And obviously, nowadays, you can actually meet in person, which is quite pleasant. So,
what a concept.
It's amazing. I'm just trying to get my head around it. But there we go. And obviously, with suppliers, you want to hopefully collaborate with them. You want to work with them. You want to have a good relationship, as I said. So you're both aiming to get something positive for each other out of the transaction, shall we say. So with those thoughts in mind, how can you and how do you see NLP techniques specifically helping to improve the communication that you have with those people and the collaboration outcome with those people as well?
That's a great question. I while you were talking, some things came to mind. Well, you touched on relationship, right? And may it be in procurement, supply chain, or just any other relationship building, we gotta be able to appreciate and pick up the other person, whoever the other person is. May it be someone in your team, may it be someone that you're doing business with, that you're negotiating with, or you're just building rapport with at the very beginning, that they feel heard and related to and valued. I specifically and very consciously say related to and not understood, because often we cannot have that understanding, maybe because we're not in their culture. I'm pretty sure you have people listening that are doing businesses across cultures. There is no true understanding, but we can at least find a baseline and relate to them in some sort of fashion. So building that relationship, again, starts with listening. It starts with meeting them where they're at. If I'm in procurement and I am building a new relationship through someone I met on LinkedIn, okay, let's just make it very simple. And we get on a call, on a Google Meet or on a Zoom, and we start building that relationship. I want to be interested in that other person. Although I want something from them, I want to be interested in that other person rather than be interesting and just talk of how great our company is. That's going to come out. your company is great, and that's going to come out, and it's going to fall on an open ear and on an open mind a lot better if you allow the other person to talk about how great they are and how great their company is and how great their product is and all of that. Because when you start listening to and you give them the opportunity to talk about themselves, there are data points in there. And when your listening is fine-tuned, you can pick up on those data points and then actually bring them back into your conversation when it's your turn to speak and weave that in. That is like the ground rule of negotiation. Because if you're letting them talk, but you're all in your head while they're talking, and you just have your next great thing to say, you have your own agenda in your head, which I know we're all guilty of doing it at some point, right? I know what I'm talking about firsthand. Then we miss those data points. And then we wonder, well, that didn't go so well. Why did I, speak on one level and that person spoke on another level? We never met, although we did meet, but we never saw eye to eye. We never built rapport. It wasn't a mutual understanding. Well, someone didn't listen. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, it's a good procurement person should, as I refer to, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So certainly listen to what people say and understand what they say and try and empathize with what they say. As you said, they will feel heard at that point. And as I listen to suppliers, I'm taking notes, trying to identify key things they're saying, which are triggers to me that allow me to follow up afterwards. What you often find with salespeople, of course, is they want to give you a message. And some will be very insistent that no matter what happens, they are going to give you that message, whether you want to hear it or not. But there we go. That's just the way sometimes these things are.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you said one word, and I want to pick up on that. When you're only about yourself, when you're trying to shove your own agenda, your own product, your own service, whatever it is that you want to shove down someone's throat, there is no room for collaboration. It's just not. When you're able to value and see and relate to the other person, that's when collaboration starts. And that's where now, other strategies of NLP come in. Pacing and leading is, of course, part of the rapport building, but then the meta program of asking great questions and finding violations in the other person's communication, and then asking more clarifying questions to then have a deeper and better understanding of how do we collaborate? Because if we don't ask those questions, which are very necessary, then we're building an agreement on sand. And I think we also know what that feels and sounds like, because I think we've all done that at some point in our career as well. And it's not good, because it kind of just falls apart because someone didn't ask those important questions, because someone wasn't fine-tuning their hearing and asking more clarifying questions to make a really sound agreement for collaboration.
Yeah, you're quite right. And it's really important that people are consistent as well. Obviously, when you're asking questions, you're looking for, and you ask them in different ways, of course, am I getting the same message back? Are they consistent in their responses? Quite often people assume that you want to hear certain things that may or may not be important. And as I said, unless you're probing in a careful manner, then you will get a stock answer perhaps sometimes, rather than the true beliefs and feelings of the person. And
that's right.
Yeah. This kind of flows into, we're touching on the 2 words, building rapport and influence. Obviously, everybody wants to influence each other in their sales and buying environment. And we think of NLP as a powerful tool in influencing people, both in a conscious way and perhaps an unconscious way as well. So how can NLP be used to build rapport and influence when you're talking to both internal stakeholders, because you're almost negotiating with people within your organization on what needs to be purchased, as well as the supplier, the external side of things, because you want to make sure there's understanding and alignment between your ways of thinking. And perhaps you're actually drawing things together between the internal and the external stakeholders. You're the linchpin between the two. So I'm just interested in where NLP fits with the rapport and influencing side.
And yes, thank you for that. And I want to speak to the influencing and NLP really quick, because there are some people out there they have learned NLP or heard about NLP on social media or through someone, or maybe even, listen to some YouTube channels. One person once came to me and said, I learned NLP. I'm an NLP practitioner. And I said, oh, where did you get your certification? And they said, YouTube. And I said, whoa, that's not, that is not where you want to be NLP certified, because there's enough half wisdom out there on NLP. So I want to speak to that. There's a difference between using NLP to inspire and using NLP to manipulate. And that is the intention behind it. And that is it. So I'm going to say that again. You're either using NLP intentionally to inspire and to influence with a win-win-win, or you're using it to manipulate. And the only difference here is the intention behind it. That's it. So when you're influencing with a win-win-win, then you have your well-formed outcome as you are building rapport with the other person. And you are, by the steps that I've elaborated to earlier in listening, you are creating those wins. You are making sure that both sides win, that there is a collaboration. When there's a collaboration, it's not just a one side wins or one company wins or one team leader wins. It is a win-win. And when I say win, there's no money involved. Well, often there is money involved, but there doesn't have to be money involved. But then there's a third win, and that's really where I get passionate about. Someone else, when there's a collaboration, wins. It's either And sometimes it's a double win. It's a win for each company. It's not just the individual. It's a win for each company. It may be a win for the families. It may be a win for the community, the environment, the God knows what, right? So looking at who else wins and how big of a ripple can you create by doing that, which starts out by the little thing of perking your ears and listening. So yes, you're right, Dave. We're not mind readers. And often we do jump to conclusions. When you have learned the NLP tools and you have, first and foremost, become a master at building rapport, and that does start out with listening. I'm going to pound on that until the cows come home. You can then weave in with the advanced methodology and the advanced strategies, weave in with your fine-tuned communication. But that is not what you're leading with, because that's what you said earlier. Salespeople, they talk a good game. They lead with their own words because somewhere they have learned you got to use the script, and then you just got to kind of lull in the other person with your script until they're numb, until they say, before I just, want to cut my wrists open, let me just sign so I can, be done with it. With NLP, you're not becoming a mind reader, but you're becoming very aware and very in tune with what the other person is saying and from which mindset the other person is coming from. And that can only happen when you know what you're listening for and when you know what the advanced language patterns are. And as I said earlier, NLP is the meta program of our communication, and it goes into two different areas. One is the meta program, which is a very specific set of language rules that when we know those rules, we can also listen for when they are violated. And then we can ask more clarifying questions and recover those violations. And we all have them in our communication. We either delete, distort, or generalize information as we're talking. And I'm doing it right now. I just totally generalized NLP on many occasions within this conversation. And then on the other hand, on the other side lies the Milton model of NLP, which is the very vague language, which is the very non-specific and the other side of the meta program. And I'm going into, the way advanced patterns now, but when we know where the violations are and when we know how to recover the violations, we can then, on the flip side, actually use some of those violations intentionally to leave out information if it's just not needed. I went way into the deep end now.
No, that's great. Fantastic. It's quite interesting. You should say, I like the three angles that you were mentioning, how I interpreted it at least, where it could be one of the people in the discussion are looking for obviously cost savings. Buyers generally are looking for cost savings. That's a key motivator, but shouldn't be an assumption. It could be the supplier is happy with the price, but actually what they want is volume, because the volume would help so many other different things. But what hopefully both parties want is for, let's say, environmental considerations to be taken into place. So you're seeing by working together, you're collaborating together, actually there's a net benefit to the environment, or it could be to the social aspects of the business where you're employing more people and obviously growing, the business together. So some interesting points you just made there. And when we're talking about, I could use the word anticipate in some respects, because when people have a discussion, they're trying to relate to people and anticipate their needs and their motivators. You're talking to suppliers, you're talking to stakeholders, and perfectly you mentioned earlier on, quite often you're talking at a multicultural level. I'm dealing with suppliers from China, from India, from the US, from Europe, and you can't take it for read that everybody's thinking in the same way because the cultural fit is different. So again, I'm coming back to how NLP can help me now. I could be dealing with a multicultural suite of people in front of me. It could be an international business, and it could be an Italian guy there, an American guy, and so on and so forth. How could I use some NLP techniques when I've got a kind of smorgasbord of people in front of me, all representing the same business, but I need to tease out of them some consistencies as well? How do I interact with these different people from different cultures, but still move things forward in a positive way?
That's a great question. And I would say if you have a boardroom full of, say, 10 people, well, first and foremost, I would go around the room and want to hear, not what they do in the company, but what is it that they value? That's what I'm really curious about, because NLP, if we look at the neurological levels, beliefs and values are one of the top levels in the neurological levels. And that is what someone deep down is driven by. And when I can tap into, if I would go around a boardroom and I would say, share your beliefs with me, no one's going to share their beliefs. But if you really are curious, what is the one thing that they truly value, and you have built just a ground level of rapport, they're going to share that with you. Or if they have a hard time finding something that they value that they want to share, you can ask them, what is the least thing that you like? So now you have a baseline in the communication, and through that you find common ground, especially when you're dealing with, and not the Centre of NLP, but one of our other businesses, the Culture Mastery, works specifically with NLP, crossing cultures and bridging that gap, because that often gets in the way. And that can cost not just a few dollars or a few euros or a few pounds. That often is pretty substantial. So finding common ground. And before we move on into a collaboration experience of how we can collaborate, first we find common ground. Where do we have commonality? And what do we all as a whole want? And if we can go around the room and each individual says, well, at the end of this conversation, I really want, this is my expectation, I really want, at least they're being heard. That's the first step. And then we can see, is there commonality enough that we can find a way to mesh this together and to collaborate, where it does become a win-win-win, where someone doesn't walk out and go, well, first of all, they didn't even listen to me, which that often happens because they weren't given the opportunity to speak, and maybe they just didn't get the opportunity to speak. What I found, Dave, is NLP is a great tool for people that are not the most confident in who they are, truly give them a sense of confidence in their communication. So they can then anticipate more and not just stay in that anticipation, but actually go into the doing.
Yeah. Some interesting things there. It's quite common if I'm going into a large meeting, I'll go and visit a supplier, let's say, for example. So I could well be on my own, but quite often you'll have a multicultural suite of people in front of you, and you're trying to build rapport with each of the individuals in your own kind of way. Because actually, sometimes you don't actually know who's the most influential, who's the decision maker in front of you. And so you don't want to alienate anybody in this process. And it can be really challenging in trying to piece things together, tease out of people what, as you say, their motivators are, what they're looking for, what's important to them, and which is the one that actually you need to build the strongest level of rapport with, the real decision maker. So some interesting thoughts.
I would say the real decision maker is probably the one, and it's not always that way, but it's often the one that's the quietest in the room. And that's already an indication. It's not the one that's best dressed. It's not the one that's the loudspeaker. And we are not mind readers. We are data gathering people. And that's what NLP helps you to gather the right data so you can then speak to that data and become the best communicator that is in the room.
Yeah.
And that's
absolutely.
an advantage.
Yeah, you're
It's a
absolutely
huge
right.
advantage.
Quite often it is the quietest person there because they're taking stock. They're hearing the different questions and the answers and the arguments, and they're summing up things. And towards the end, that's when they come out of themselves and they sort of reveal their true selves. Now, before this recording, I reached out to a community that I built on Facebook. It's called the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub. And I asked, what questions would they be keen for me to ask? Okay, so I had some questions come back, and actually one of the guys, Tris Willis, would like to understand how NLP could help procurement deal with conflict management, particularly during a difficult negotiations. Have you got any example stories that you can share where there's been a conflict situation?
Yes, I actually have a client who took all of our courses, and she is in procurement and supply chain. She's the leader of the team, and she was in a conflict with her superior. And when I think let me tell the story real quick. So my client was not saying she was getting through to her superior, and they were emailing because they were not in the same place. He's, stationed somewhere else where she is, and they were emailing. And as I'm coaching her, she's getting really frustrated. Now, when frustration and emotions are high, intelligence is low, and now you're trying to type it. And in our communication, the words are only a small percentage in comparison to our body language and our tonality. So when we're writing something, the tonality goes out the window. Well, actually, it doesn't, because the person that's reading the email that you wrote, the tonality gets implemented by that person, the mindset that they're in. That can be really good, and that can be really, 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 really bad. You're also making things meaning something if that person language is not, English is not their first language, which in my client's case, that is. So the frustration, email back and forth and adding more tasks on the project while this is all going on just heightened the frustration and the conflict even more. The deals weren't getting done. The agreements weren't getting signed. And in addition to that, the team was suffering because both superiors are trying to figure things out. But it's like think of a piece of rope that you tie, and you kind of twist it and you twist it and twist it, and it gets more tangled up and more rigid and more it's just this one big blob of rope. And that's how it was. And I finally stopped her and I said, what if you would get on the phone with your superior and you would ask a really good question? You put some questions together, and then you shut up and you listen. It was really hard for her. It was very hard for her. And she did. And through that conflict resolution with her superior, she was able to come back to her team, and they were able to then implement training of things that she has learned, because now suddenly her superior understood where she was coming from. She understood where her superior was coming from. Because again, we're assuming, we're reading in things. And that's where conflict comes into place. We're reading things into situations because we can only understand, and now I'm using the word very consciously, understand from our model of the world. The model of the world is actually the first and foremost strategy that we teach in NLP, and we all have a different model of the world. So when we're in a conflict, each person that's part of the conflict has a different point of view. And that doesn't make any of these point of views right or wrong. And when we're able to come together in person where we see each other and where we're able to give space to each other to be heard and related to and valued. Yes, although we're in a conflict, I can still value you and check our emotions at the door. That's where NLP really helps in conflict resolution.
Yeah, and understand that obviously people have their own perspectives, and something that's a bit of a cliche, but put yourself in the other people's shoes and think of it from their perspective. And quite often you could say, oh, actually, now I'm considering it. If I was on that side of the table, how this may come across, or what their motivator is and why it is that way. So it's really important that I find that you reflect the way that person is thinking of your words and how they are probably being targeted, challenged. Perhaps they've been given specific objectives. They're being motivated in ways that you're not aware of. So you've got to try and get yourself in their shoes and see it from their way. And quite often that's when the magic happens. Suddenly you get a light bulb moment. I know what they're on about now. It suddenly goes into place. And now you can find some common ground again.
Yeah, that sounds simple, Dave. And it is simple when we can practice it and when we can leave our emotions out of the way. I think that's key here as well.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I find fascinating is that the awareness, the understanding of the human mind is growing, and it's probably growing quite exponentially. So I'm keen to understand, how do you keep on top of the developments in your field? How do you know what new things are coming out, and how do you then get to apply them yourself?
Yeah, I just came back from a 1 week extended training. So I constantly go, I like to read. I like to do online courses, but first and foremost, I love to go and actually meet with a mentor in person and learn and just take notes after notes after notes and review those notes and then start implementing those notes. I'm a big believer that, if you're taking a course, say online, and you're not taking notes, you're just listening to it, it's going to go away, and because you're never going to implement everything that you have heard. So constantly implementing, learning from others, collaborating with other people like yourself that might have things that you don't have yet that you anticipate to have. That is definitely a big piece in that. I say leaders are learners. If you say, I already know that, then I can't take you serious, because we only know so much. Like you said, our human brain is constantly developing, and we're taking in information. We're taking in more information than we have ever taken in information at any given moment through social media and all of the information that we're taking in through all of all of our senses and all of the outlets. And yet we're only using about 8, maybe 10% of our brain. So we have a lot of more capability.
Is there any game-changing things that's happened in the last few years that you think is important for people to be aware of?
Well, we had the pandemic, and I think it taught us many great lessons. I think allowing, I don't know if that would be a game changer, but we've all experienced the same adversity in a different way. And looking at how have other people overcome that adversity and learning from that, I think that for me is always a big game changer, learning from others. And, one of the laws of NLP is expert modeling. How can I model someone that has this game-changing result or this game-changing idea? It's out there for you.
Yeah.
But you got to be aware and open that you do want that.
Yeah, I was just curious because, as you say, the pandemic was a situation people may have thought about. But when it actually happens, there's a huge possibility to learn something actually developing in front of you. How does the population change its behaviors when it's locked down? And you see all these things going on TV, as you say, social media. You're fed lots of information through the news and every broadcasting channel there could possibly be. And so you're almost in a unique environment to study how the brain is is operating, how people are thinking in a real set, a real sort of experiment, but it's the whole world going through that experiment. So I was just keen to understand if there was anything that was coming out of that really took the NLP world by surprise or anything like that.
I don't think it took by surprise, but it showed us of how human behavior can adapt quickly if aware that they want to adapt. And that if someone, you have the two mindsets. You either have the growth mindset or you have the fixed mindset. And the growth mindset, those were the people with a growth mindset that were able to, I'm going to use the P word, that were able to pivot very quickly during the pandemic. And then there were the fixed mindset, the people that are coming from the thought process of, oh, life is happening to me, for me. I am the victim here. They're going to continue to be the victim, maybe a pandemic or not. Maybe, it could be the sun shining and it's raising rose petals and they're still the victim. So I think it was more of a confirmation of human behavior. And moving forward, it is fascinating to watch how it has an impact on our beliefs and our values, specifically on our children as they're growing older, that have gone through, say, elementary school or kindergarten in front of a screen.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't go somewhere and they couldn't have that loving interaction with their peers and with their teachers and with friends and make friends. It was very two-dimensional. So it will have an impact on these kids. And it takes us, I'm going to say, the mature generation to continue to model, to come back to maybe an even better version than before the pandemic of what that future looks like. And that starts not with the mature or the Gen Zs, the Gen Xers and the millennials to tell the Gen Zs, but to actual model. What does that look like? That is a big, big, big piece of NLP. And then that model is plugged into the outcome. For what outcome are we modeling? And with which outcome are we modeling?
Yeah. So I've got one more question, but before I go into that, how can people find all this information about you? Where can they learn everything that you teach other than obviously your great podcast? Where else should they go and look?
Very simple. Centre of NLP. So centreofnlp.com is the website. info@centreofnlp is our email. You're welcome to shoot us a quick email. With any questions. I'm an open book and I love to teach, and I'm an educator at heart. So yeah, that's where you find us.
Perfect. And you're on virtually most social medias, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you're everywhere. So yeah,
we're
should
everywhere.
be easy to find. Perfect. So the last question then, just a chance to reflect on the most memorable successes, the achievements and transformations you've achieved with clients after training them in NLP. What would you suggest are your top drawer experiences, tips and techniques that you think you would like to share today with the audience to help them accelerate their, hopefully, career success?
Yeah, there were many stories that came into mind, and I want to tell the story of one of my clients who only was a client for 3 months. And he came and he had a real pain. And the pain was that he was a C-level IT person, very well paid, lost his job, and very much in his head as an IT C-level executive. And he was invited in all of these incredible interviews, but he never got to the next round. And he said, I'm really hurting. I'm this provider for my family. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So I started role playing with him. And it turns out he didn't listen. He sat on his hands. He was trying for his legs to not go up and down, his knees not to bounce. And he was looking down while I was talking to him. And I asked him some questions as we were role playing. And he did not listen to the question. And then I paused and I said, hey, what was going on in your head while I was talking? He says, well, I was thinking about what I was going to tell you. And I said, while you were thinking about what you're going to tell me, did you hear the question? And did you understand the question? He goes, no, because I was having a conversation with myself in my head. And I said, aha. And what's going on with the body language? Why are you sitting on your hands? And what's going on with the legs? He says, well, I read in an NLP book that you always need to have your body language in check because it's the language within your language that speaks the loudest. And I said, yes, that's correct. And while you're doing that, are you giving yourself commands of being still? He says, yeah, and it's hard. And I said, yeah, I could tell. It was painful watching. And I said, what if you just allow your legs to bounce and your hands to fiddle and you're being present with a person? And then if you're not clear, what if you would just ask another clarifying question? These are all very, very simple, very elementary NLP strategies, but they were powerful because it turned him around like that. He had a belief, and we talk about beliefs in a master course, but he had a belief that he had to have his body language in check, that he had to have everything in place, that he needed to say the wittiest things, the most important things of all of the whole IT universe that he had in his head. But he forgot to be present. And with the few little NLP tools and strategies of building rapport, of listening, of yes, your body language is part of your whole language, but allow it to speak, allow it to be authentic. And him understanding what his belief was and turning that belief around immediately got him the position that he wanted. That's why he was only a client for 3 months.
Darn it. That's great.
I love those clients, though, because they allow me to tell those stories.
Yeah. No, it's great to hear that obviously the guy now is obviously very successful. And they say in 3 months, though, you helped him overcome some things he was trying to contain. He wasn't being himself. You alleviated him of those issues, perhaps we say. So, so good news.
I didn't do that. He did. Yeah. And that's the thing about NLP. It's not that you're coming to someone and someone fixes you like a chiropractor. You learn the strategies, you learn to understand about yourself so you can then have lasting change.
Yeah, you kind of facilitate the journey, I guess. Is that right? Yeah. Well, that's been absolutely brilliant, Brigitta. I know we've taken up the full amount of time we're allowed for today, so I hope that's okay. But no, thank you very much for coming on. I've really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you, Dave, for having me.
Take care then. Bye.
Ciao.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.